So they've got the rats related to the place there that are coming into the backyards. That's code and health issues. They've faced some aggressive bush and tree pruning from State Highway, which is really confusing to them. They have sidewalks in front of their place that don't have any ADA accessibility. The sidewalk kind of comes along and then drops off this steep curb there that comes around into the Eastern Market. And then at some point, people had complained about the light from the light poles where the Eastern Chinese food place is at, and so they had them shut off, but now the people would like them to be turned back on. And so there's all these different entities that they're having to deal with, and I was hopeful that maybe we could appoint somebody on the city staff to help them resolve these and work with these different folks. And I know they've been working with George Leventhal's office, but it hasn't quite all come together, and some of them are city things. And the last incident that happened with the aggressive pruning, I think the city staff responded with all the information, but we didn't have anything to do with it, and the answer is really held in State Highway. But it's really hard for the resident to keep hearing that it's not us, it's State Highway, it's not us, it's the county, it's not us, it's public health, and all of those things are true, but it doesn't feel very good to be on the other side of that message. So I thought maybe we could take a more proactive approach to helping them out. My pet peeve for the week is the vending machines. The vending machines, yeah. So my pet peeve is that the vending machines have become even more expensive, and they mostly sell junk food. Like you can buy a cinnamon donut pastry that's like as big as your head, and M&Ms, and lots of candy, and lots of sugar and caffeinated soda. And, I see the kids that are there buying the food after school, not really the greatest healthy choices that we could offer to people, trying to promote health. I think that we should take a look at that. I don't know if we could do, like as part of one of the business incubators, to run a little store there where we could sell apples and bananas and popcorn. We could get one of those little popcorn machines or something and have somebody staff it, but the vending machines kind of drive me nuts. It drove me nuts last year when I had a kid in aftercare, and she told me that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the kids who brought money with them could go in the afternoon to the vending machines, and then the kids who had money would sit and eat their vending machine candy in front of all of the other kids in the aftercare, and that was kind of uncool. And then it didn't help when the first week of school this year, my kid who's now in junior high, came home and had spent all of her money in the vending machines at the city. And, there's only so much parental control you can take over those choices, but I think we could choose as a city to make available healthier choices for the kids. And so that's my pet peeve for the week. And then I want to tell everybody, I want to remind everybody about the Tacoma Park Folk Festival, which is coming up this Sunday. And it's from 11 to 6:30. It's at the Tacoma Park Middle School. They have 7 stages of live music. It's all free. They have community tables, and they have crafts that are there. It's really a lot of fun. I've been doing it for a lot of years. If you haven't signed up to volunteer, they're still looking for some volunteers in the afternoons. I think they want some folks to help with hospitality, parking, some of the grounds pickup, and I think they have some stage activities that are available as well. So they're still looking for volunteers. And this year is Pete Seeger's 90th birthday, and so the theme this year is that every stage at some point during the day is doing sing-alongs of Pete Seeger music. So I hope that you folks will all come out and join us. I think it's going to be a good time. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
It was grand August. My family and I went up to Wisconsin to visit some friends. And one of the things that happened here during the month was that an area not far from here, in fact, a couple hundred feet, there was a controversy that came into being, and it happens every year just about this time. It's the Ed Wilhelm Field, which isn't in my ward, but I must admit that I walk my dog there in the mornings between 6:30 and 7:15, and I have done so for over 10 years. And every time about this year, in anticipation of the school year opening, people wander around and make threats about how it's against the law to walk your dog anywhere in Tacoma Park not on a leash, or to have your dog anywhere in Tacoma Park. And this field, Ed Wilhelm Field, is a is a park, is a county-owned field. It's managed on the lower part by Tacoma Park through a memorandum of understanding. The upper part is not in that memorandum. There's the school involved. There's the county police department involved. There's the county park and planning police department involved. Our own city police department is involved, reluctantly. And our own city manager is the, I'm calling her the Tsarina of dog parks these days, because she has ultimate authority on how we have or don't have dog parks. Now, I'm not proposing that we have a dog park on this piece of land. What I am proposing is that we learn to share. And for 45 minutes in the morning on a place where we've had a certain use for over 10 years, I'm not happy that it's almost a ritual that threats are made and police from other jurisdictions come down and we go round and round. So I'm hoping that our memorandum of understanding, which relates mostly to recreational uses, can be expanded, that we can look back at this memorandum and say that a dog chasing a Frisbee or a tennis ball is a form of recreation, and that there can be a sign or whatever's necessary put up at that park saying between 6:30 and 7:15 every morning, watch out because there are dogs up here who might chase your tennis ball or whatever. And I don't see that is a huge imposition on anybody, you know. So I'd like our Tsarina to think about that a little bit, and we can talk about it at a later date. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. I had a couple comments. I enjoyed the break, but also sometimes missed the service up here on the dais. So it's August was sort of a mixed blessing in that way. But one thing I saw again, I mentioned this last summer when I came back, that I saw a very interesting way that a community had decided to present information instead of banners tied to metal poles or to railings. Last year I saw these two substantial wooden posts with a groove in it, and you could just, there was regulations apparently for how big your placard could be. It was made out of wood, painted, whatever you wanted on it, and it was slid into these two posts, and they had a number of them stacked up, and they could easily take them out and put the new ones in. Well, this time I saw one where instead the banners were just, not banners, the placards of wood were hanging down and just had simple eye screws affixed to the top of the wood. And it was a very, again, a simple white frame, very attractive way to present information about what's going on in the community, as opposed to the way we're doing it here now, which with these banners that can be ratty and ropes flying all over the place. I think it would be an improvement for us to do something that would be very low cost. The second item has to do with recycling. One of my residents brought to my attention that we have changed some of the things that we accept in recycling, but the website hasn't changed, so we should update the website. But I also think we might want to clarify to people what's going on with the recycling program, because people are still being told to separate their two items, and I understand that, paper from everything else, and I understand that's the way Darrell and Public Works wants them to do it, because I think it makes it easier when it ultimately gets separated up at the transfer station. But people are confused because what they see is the truck pulls up and the yellow bin goes in and the paper gets thrown in, and so it's all going into the same place. So people are saying, what's going on? Why am I doing this task of continuing to, I've been doing this for the last 20 years, so I continue to do it, sort of like the dog park thing, right? So I think we need to clarify, if we really want people to continue to separate, why that is, and maybe it would be a great article for the city newsletter. Wanted to check in, the city manager may not have the answer to this, but if we could get a response on this around where we are on the 100% wind power, because we approved 100% wind power, but I know there was some question. We were waiting back for some information from the county, and I just was very curious about where that is at. And then the dog park issue, I also think that there should be a way for us to utilize these spaces in multiple ways. One of my constituents who has a dog and also goes to Ed Wilhelm Field sometimes in the mornings, bought a very interesting brochure back from Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a community which is sort of similar to ours in that it's mostly built up. There's not a lot of places to build new parks or designate single-use outdoor activity space. And what they've done is they have a whole brochure that tells which parks are dog parks at what time and when people can have dogs off leash, and then everybody knows about it. The signs are posted at the park, and they have this brochure. So I scanned the brochure, and I'll send around copies to everyone about that. But it seems like we should be able to, in places like Ed Wilhelm Field and Spring Park, figure out a way to have multiple uses, including the dog park or dog exercise space.
Councilmember Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the holiday during the month of August that the council was off. I think Ward 4 residents seem to have a happy August, and I think our dogs are happy. That's all. Thank you.
And I've got a couple items. First, I wanted to note that I believe the last meeting we had in here before we went on break, I said it was going to be the last meeting in here. I'll try it one more time. I think tonight is the last meeting we're going to have in here. Next week, we're not going to have a council meeting. We're going to have a tour for the council and the public up at Public Works to see what the proposals are for various renovations up there and have a better understanding of it. I think it'll be a lot better for the council and the public to see some of the issues that need to be addressed and maybe a better sense of the priorities if we can't do everything, a better understanding of what should be done. Another thing I just wanted to mention is I had brought up prior to the break and have been discussing with the city clerk and others potential needs around dealing with possible H1N1 virus, that if there are a lot of cases of that, how it could affect continuity of operations for the city and how it might affect the election on November 3rd. So we're continuing to try and figure those things out and be proactive about it in hopes that we don't need to go there, but we need to be prepared in case we do. And one thing that I wanted to mention that came up while we were on break, 2 weeks ago today, Governor O'Malley announced a number of cuts in the state budget and how those cuts would affect counties and municipalities. What's tended to get lost, particularly in the press, is the fact that these affect municipalities. Everybody talks about, oh, the counties lost 90% of their transportation funding. Well, municipalities, we lost 90% of our transportation funding. We also lost 35% of our police aid. And just so people realize and don't think that, oh, well, it was just the counties that were affected, in the case of the city of Tacoma Park, the figure that we lost in state aid that was, I'll say, promised for this fiscal year and which was incorporated in all of our budget assumptions for the budget year that we are currently in, amounts to about $577,000, and that's 3%, about 3% of our general fund. In talking with colleagues from other municipalities, there are some municipalities where those cuts are affecting 8% of their general fund. So I think not only the state, not only the counties, but the municipalities are all having to look at how this will affect operations in the current year, and I think we'll hear some more about that from the city manager in her comments, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody realizes, since this doesn't get coverage in the press, that this is affecting municipalities pretty strongly. And it's an issue that broke one day before the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee, which I sit on again this year, when we met to discuss the priorities for the league for the year for the session in Annapolis. And it kind of blew all of the legislative proposals by various municipalities across the state right off the table. There were 25 proposals, 2 of them from Tacoma Park. Ours, along with everybody else's, just kind of went by the wayside. There will be no new initiatives. There will be no ways to spend another dime that doesn't have to be spent. And the proposal that will be put forth at the legislative conference in October, which a number of us are planning to attend, will be to basically try and protect whatever revenues we still have by the time we meet in October. There's another potential round of cuts coming from the governor mid-September, and that is rumored to include cuts to our share of the income tax. So we've had bad news already, and there's probably more on the way. So I just wanted to make people aware of that. On that happy note, are there any other council comments? Okay, then the next item on our agenda is adoption of minutes, and we have ones that are listed on the agenda, which is May 26th, June 1st, June 8th, and June 15th, and in addition, we have another set of minutes that did not get listed on the agenda, which is for June 22nd. Would somebody like to move adoption?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Clay. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Anybody has any edits, if they can please get those to the clerk. I have a couple, if I can pass those down. And I've kind of commented already on agenda scheduling update. Maybe if I can just get a sense at this point in terms of additional agenda items. There was some talk earlier in the day about possible removal of items from the consent agenda, but I wasn't clear where that ended up. Did anybody have any items that they were going to remove? Councilmember Snipper?
2.
That
A
was
and B.
that-
A and C.
A and C? Is that all? Okay, so we'll cover those items after the consent agenda. And we will now move along to public comment period. If anybody has anything that they'd like to comment on that is not on our special session agenda tonight, so that would be anything on the work session or anything not on the agenda, please introduce yourselves and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Yeah, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, Ward 4. I want to welcome everybody back. I hope you all had a great time on the recess. I know I did. And I also would like to let people know that on the 25th, we're having a big demonstration at the Supreme Court against the death penalty for Troy Davis, who has been he's about to be executed in Georgia. They got a stay of execution for hearing, but we still don't want to let that go by, because also Texas just recently executed somebody who did not, they found out later on, did not commit the crime. So they did make a mistake in Texas. But also I'd like to remind people that in 56 more days, we are going to be voting. So I'd like to let the people on the council, let them know that they have to work on their campaigns, and also to let people out there who are listening tonight, remind them to get people registered to vote. If it's one thing you can do to assure your passage into adulthood, it's not drinking beer, it's not going up, shooting up methamphetamine, or smoking a big joint, or going out and getting bombed on narcotics. The best way to do it is all get together and register each other to vote. I think that would be the most meaningful thing you could do for your family, your community, and yourselves. Register to vote. And also on the 13th, I'll be out there at the Tacoma Park Folk Festival with the big peace symbol, since it's Pete Seeger's birthday. I'd like to ask everybody to see what they can do to continue working for peace, whether it's protesting the war, whether it's protesting poverty and violence, gangs, or whether it's protesting with getting people to register to vote, protesting the death penalty. We got to affirm life, no matter what it takes. And also, about those dogs, I think I know what the problem is. I wear sandals when I go out and about. Sometimes I go out and about barefoot. The last thing I find very relaxing is to step in somebody's dog turds because they have not taken the moment to pick up after their dogs and scoop it. You know, I mean, I know dogs, they can't control what they're doing, but we as human beings can be at least considerate of other people, other children who are going to be walking to and from school and who are going to be walking along the sidewalks and in the grass. Nobody wants to be stepped, oh, I stepped in a dog turd. There is nothing more foul than that. And it's not a very neighborly thing to do. So everybody, please, pick up after your dogs, register to vote, and come out and work for peace. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
Let's sit down.
Good evening. Hi, all of you. I'm Pat Rumbaugh. I don't know if you remember me, but I live on Maple Avenue, and I'm the organizer of the Tacoma Park Play Committee. You may or may not know that we've been named a Playful City USA, and actually we're planning our play day, gearing up for it, which will be Saturday the 26th at Hefner Park from 11 to 1. We're also going to share with the Recreation Department at the Folk Festival a table, and we're looking forward to that. And we actually are picking up our banner tomorrow, and I wish we were hanging it on nice poles, but we'll hang it somewhere this year. But what I'm specifically here to talk to you about is our two playful signs that we have. And I'm not sure, Ms. Matthews, if that got on the agenda or not.
It's going to get on the agenda.
It's going to get terrific. Okay. Just hoping we can get these two now entering Playful City USA signs up. But thank you all for your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work on getting the Playful City designation. That was a lot of work.
I came here on bus 18, right on bus 18. I'm Colleen DePaul, and I live at Victory Tower, and some of us from Victory Tower, which is a senior center, and we have a resident council, transportation committee, and we want to thank Right On Montgomery County Transit for honoring our longtime request to have this happen, so we'll be connected directly to all the goodies here at the library and the community center and the swimming pool next door, and have direct access to the Washington Adventist. We go right past the front door. We just have been trying it out yesterday and today, and it works, and we want to thank you all, the city manager's office, the mayor, council members, everybody that has been supporting us. You even passed a resolution and helped provide a bus to get us to the county meeting on that. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to note that row 3 is by far the most colorful and playful of all the rows in this auditorium tonight. I'm sorry, but if you just check, it's purple, blue, pink, yellow, and orange all in one row. I mean, it's kind of astounding.
Good evening. I'm Ron Wiley from the Adventist Community Services. Just 3, how are you doing? I appreciated your good advice to young people and also to dogs. At any rate, just 3 things. I want to remind you all of our standing invitation to come over and have a symbolic city council meeting at the Piney Branch Pool. At your convenience.
Do we have to be in our swimsuits?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't get into that, but we'll go there.
It'd be pretty shocking for people.
Well, Isn't everything you want to know about that the mayor can help you with? He was the star of our reopening, along with Dr. G, the principal over at the school. But I do appreciate, as many do, the contributions that you have made both last year and this year to the pool, and we want that to be clear to the people that are enjoying it. We opened on the 23rd, and so we're going into this fiscal year. We've taken on considerably more responsibility, and the subsidy from the county is considerably lower, but we're looking forward to a good year. The second thing is that I want to just mention that we have just received a $10,000 food grant from the capital area food program, Abe Collins group, due to the work of some of our good volunteers. That's been possible, and I want you to know that we're delighted that that, along with a little over 2,600 that we just received from the state in the emergency food program, really helps us to do an even better job in these difficult times for particularly citizens of Tacoma Park. So I knew you'd want to know about that. The third thing is that we don't want to forget our roots here, and we've put together, and we're just about ready to roll out a program that's focused on after-school care for young people in terms of computer tutoring, and also the package involves computer training and other education for the parents of those young people. The focus here is, again, lower income families that need strengthening. And so we think that combination, we've had some very good feedback on this, and I just wanted you to know that's coming. We want to make it possible for low-income families here in Tacoma Park to participate. So we look forward to working with each of you. Welcome back.
Great, thank you.
All the fun left the room.
Hi, my name is Jacob Harris, and I'm from Ward 2, and I would like to ask if the city would consider putting more sidewalks in my neighborhood. There's a lot of cut-through traffic, and I feel it's dangerous to walk home from my school.
And what's your neighborhood, what's your street?
I live on Elm Avenue.
I'll say that we're due to have a discussion fairly soon. I'm not sure exactly of a date yet, but we do need to have a discussion about some sidewalk installations, because we do have some money coming in from the speed cameras on both Ethan Allen and New Hampshire Avenue, and those have to be used for public safety, and one of the things that we earmark those for is potentially sidewalks where there are no existing sidewalks. So we do have some money that we can use for that, and we will have a discussion coming up in the relatively near future about how we're going to go about that, and I guess where those will be going. So thank you for your observation, and we agree with you, and hopefully we have the money to do something about it relatively soon.
Mayor Williams, I believe we've also written a couple of grant applications from the planning department for sidewalks that are specific to the Ward 2 area and specifically the area where Jacob and his family live.
Okay, good. So you have at least a couple of chances of getting those. So we'll welcome your further input as we talk about those, and it would be good if you come back and make sure that we know whether we're covering all the areas that you think need to be covered. So we look forward to that. And thanks for telling us, sharing that. Anybody else? All right, then we will move along to the city manager's comments.
Just a couple items this evening. I think as the mayor already noted, we got some very bad news just a couple weeks ago in terms of the state budget cuts. Wanted to let the council know that prior to leaving for vacation, I was in contact with all the members of the management team to start putting together some ideas of how we deal with the loss of $577,000 just 2 months into our fiscal year. My hope is to have some thoughts to share with the council sometime in the next 30 days. Obviously in addition to some other cuts that may be happening by the state again, the city will be going through reassessment. So we'll have to see how our property values are holding up, because that could have a tremendous impact on us financially as well. I wanted to give the council an update on the auditorium project. Obviously, as the mayor noted, this would be the last time for some time that we'll be meeting in this chamber. Beginning tomorrow, the staff will begin removing audiovisual equipment from the space, and we'll be removing other furnishings as well. There will be a meeting tomorrow to basically finalize the construction schedule. But it does appear that we'll be tearing up the space fairly soon, and the project is to be completed within 180 days, or roughly early March of 2010. So I'll give you an update at the next meeting after the schedule has been finalized, just to give you a better idea of what will be happening when during the construction. Yes.
Ms. Matthews, I think someone sitting at home might think it's curious, the juxtaposition of talking about tax cuts and the difficulty on the city, and then thinking about spending money to refurbish the auditorium where the council meets. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the funding for the renovation work and how that fits in with the current fiscal problems.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so, Councilmember Siemens. The project basically will entail renovating the space not only for official city proceedings such as the city council meeting or other official functions, but to use the space as a performing arts center. It will be basically funded through several sources, a grant from the federal government, both state bond bill monies. The city had elected to use some of its program open space funds towards this project, and there will also be a $150,000 donation from Washington Adventist Hospital. So basically it will be funded through other sources.
I thank you for that, and also like to point out that one of the difficulties with this is that those other government entities are facing financial difficulties too. But with the way that the laws work, that these allocations, should we choose not to do them, would end up going to another jurisdiction for a similar use. The government does not have nor would they allow us to take these funds and contribute them as a donation back to the federal or state government. That they would be used for a similar type of project in another community.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, and we couldn't use them for some other project ourselves. They could not go into the general fund.
Thank you.
That's correct. I think, unfortunately, the young man just left, but I think in regard to the sidewalk installation, I think as Councilmember Clay noted, there are some Safe Routes to School monies that the council had previously agreed to allocate towards sidewalk installation, and certainly the majority of the capital funds from the speed cameras through the budget process, the council had determined that they would be used for sidewalk installation. While I was on vacation, staff did have a meeting with Tool Design Group, which is the firm that had been retained by the city both for the ADA accessibility study as well as the missing sidewalk study. I'm trying to bring that process to conclusion. My hope is sometime probably in the next 30 to 60 days to bring forward to the council a recommendation of what areas we think should be prioritized in terms of the design and installation of sidewalks, and basically to give you all a plan to consider and to provide some direction to staff.
My constituents are interested in permeable surface sidewalks. And I talked to the planning office about it and wasn't greeted with uber enthusiasm. I'll just say it that way. And I think most of that's just because it's not, it hasn't been that commonly practiced, but I think we should take a look at it and see what we can do to not exacerbate our storm runoff and drainage problems, both in design and in the materials that we use. And I would say that the sidewalk that runs along East-West Highway would be maybe an example of how not to do it. There are some nice sidewalks with parking strips and everything, though, that are throughout the city that look very nice, and it at least runs off into the grass instead of running over the curb and into the stormwater. But permeable surface would be even that much better.
In the discussions, Councilmember Clay, that I had with staff, I knew this was an interest of yours, and I imagine of other council members. I would say, to use your term, the uber enthusiasm from the planning staff would probably be mirrored by the public works director. But certainly, I think everyone's open to looking at it. I think there was just some understandable concern about technology that has not been fully tried and tested, and what that may mean for the city in terms of maintenance costs going forward. But it's certainly something that we would talk to a design firm about and see what options there might be. That's all I have, unless there's any questions about anything.
Seeing no further questions for the city manager, thank you. And we will move on to our next agenda item, which is a public hearing on the Community Development Block Grant Program. Councilmember Siemens.
Mayor Williams, I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion because I do have a relationship with one of the applicants.
Okay.
I should have said with one of the applying organizations.
Actually, the purpose of the public hearing this evening is not to comment on the applications that we received today, but to give the community an opportunity to identify or comment on needs of the Tacoma Park's low and moderate income population. Many of you may be aware of that this is the time of the year that we generally kick off and solicit projects and proposals for the use of the city's community development block grant funds. These are federal funds that are made available to the City of Tacoma Park through the Montgomery County Department of Housing and Community Affairs. The dollar amount is in a state of flux right now, but funds can either be spent, a majority of the funds that are allocated to the city have to be spent on capital projects, with the 15% set aside for public service or community service projects. And in talking to the folks at the county, they can't give me a firm number, so I'm looking somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 for community service projects, which is typically what the types of proposals we get from the public. A majority of the funds, as I indicated, need to go to projects which benefit individuals of low and moderate income, and included in your agenda packet are some supplemental pieces of material that will give you a breakdown of what that translates in based on family or household size. And then, again, the balance goes, or it can go towards projects which benefit low and moderate income neighborhoods, areas that have been identified by the county as meeting 51% of the, with 51% of the population meeting those income guidelines or standards. And that's part of Ward 5, part of Ward 6, a little bit of Councilmember Siemens' Ward 4. The deadline for applications for projects from the community was last Wednesday. We received 6 applications with requests in excess of $60,000. Again, we have 20, 25. And we'll be going through those with the review committee to evaluate the proposals and come back to you, I believe, on October 5th with specific recommendations. The public hearing that you're holding tonight is required by the program, and again, its intent is to solicit comments from the community in terms of what specific needs there may be with the low and moderate income population that we need to address or see if we can address through the review process when we go through with the applications themselves.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm looking at the sign-in sheet over there. I'm not sure anybody
There
has
wasn't
signed
anybody
in.
on it. I can't.
Well, just because no one signed up doesn't mean somebody can't. Would anybody like to speak at the public hearing?
I'd just like to say that we put in an application that we think is somewhat unique. Right from the beginning, when we took on the job of the pool, we knew that our public interest aspects should be given attention with regard to needing to get enough financial support to keep the thing going. And actually, the county was pleasantly surprised in terms of the revenues that we were able to generate. And as I reported to you before, we also, I want to say, turned back, did not use about $40,000 that was there that had been appropriated for us. We can carry over the revenues of about $25,000 that we generated. But right from the beginning, in talking to our pool advisory committee, we said we really wanted to provide for low-income families and young people. So when I was before the county council in the budget hearing, that came up from Valerie Irvin, who asked what we were doing, and I said we were giving special attention and would continue to do that. And this proposal for the block grant money, which is $8,500, would provide a subsidy for eligible low-income families. We foresee about 150 young people and 50 seniors that would be provided for in terms of swimming lessons and other kinds of things, and pool passes. So we hope that the review committee will look at that in a most positive way, and that you all will when it gets to you. I thank you for your considerations.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to testify at this public hearing on community development block grants?
Yeah, I'll ask one thing about it. Hello, my name's Pat Lovelace again, 7620 Maple Avenue. I would like to see some of the money we could put aside to help educate our youth about the gangs, to help give our kids in school something to look forward to. Maybe some after-school education, maybe some camp or something for our kids to look forward to, because if we don't do it, the gangsters will. And we've got to always be aware of that. We've got to keep one step ahead of that. You know, and one thing I was thinking we could do is we should have invited Barack Obama and his family to come to our folk festival to speak to our children about the joys of working for peace and about what staying out of gangs can really do. Because he spoke just recently down in Arlington schools, Wakefield High. And we should have invited him up here. And we could have put some of our money towards security for Obama and his family. And I think that would go a long way and last a whole lifetime for our children to be able to tell their kids and their kids on down the line how great it is to stay out of gangs, to stay away from drugs, and to a firm life. Because that's what Tacoma Park stands for. And I think our kids are our greatest natural resource. And I think this money should go to help a lot of our low-income kids make their lives a lot more positive. Thank you very much. And remember, we got to do everything we can to make our youth better off, because they're our future leaders. We can't forget that. That's where our money should go.
Thanks for your comments on that. And I'll remind folks that we did invite President Obama to come to the Folk Festival. Our invitation was acknowledged. They said thank you, but our schedule's fairly full, but we'll keep your interest on file, and we hope that they will be interested in coming the short distance up the street and visiting our community at some point in the future.
Is the rec still doing a turkey trot? They could
we had our, I don't know whether some people say if it's the first, it can't be the first annual, but I'll call it the first annual reinstituted
5K.
5K race. And
or maybe he's a runner. I think he's
I think he's a basketball player.
Oh, right.
Maybe we need to have a 3-on-3 tournament or something in there.
Is there anybody else who would like to testify at the public hearing on community development block grants? Okay, we will close the public hearing on community development block grants, and this will come back to us in about a month, you say? October 5th. Thank you. The next item is a presentation from the police department on the CompStat program. Welcome.
Good evening. We're here tonight to announce a new program and to invite the council and the general public, our residents of our city, to a community CompStat meeting on September 30th, 2009 at 7:30 in the Azalea Room. In March of this year, we started our CompStat program, and for the public, though I know the council has it, for the public that's watching tonight, CompStat is a system to strategically manage law enforcement operations. The purpose of CompStat is to develop effective and selective strategies to combat crime within and issues within our neighborhoods based on data analysis and accountability. It focuses on outcomes. It's not used to measure productivity. The goal of CompStat is problem solving and obviously creating a safe community. In March of this year, we started our own CompStat program in the department, and we've been doing it in our monthly staff meetings. Colleen Liu, our crime analyst, prepares a new presentation each month. The state of Maryland has made CompStat their #1 priority in their war on crime. Departmental personnel from myself to all our managers and supervisory staff and Colleen have been undergoing numerous trainings that have been put on in the state of Maryland, which are free and have been excellent in bringing us to where we are today in our program. The state, as a part of its program, has also evaluated our program. We're one of the first smaller municipalities to start it, and they've given us feedback and have found our program rather well, and they like what we're doing. Our citizens at Tacoma Park, as we all know, are always asking for updates on crime and what we're doing in combating it. Community CompStat is for our residents. We will invite our citizens to sit with myself and staff, and we will go through a CompStat session with them. They'll see what's happening in the city and how we're going to respond to it and what strategies we will use. They will see our staff and how we interact with them and our accountability and how they will respond to different problems within the city. Our goal is to better inform our residents and to get them to truly partner with us to make our neighborhoods safer. When we started planning this, we were told that only one other jurisdiction in the United States has actually brought the community into it. So this is going to be an experiment, and we're entering really uncharted waters. But I'm confident that bringing the public aboard will help us. In our first 6 months, we believe we're off to a good start with our program within the department. We've had the city manager and the deputy city manager observe one of our CompStat sessions, gotten feedback from them, and my goal is a team-oriented approach with accountability, and having the public participate will only add transparency to the process. Colleen will now go into some depth about what we're doing with the program, and at the end of her presentation, we'll take your questions. Colleen.
I think that everyone got April 2009 sample presentation. That's just like a general idea of what we do in our staff meetings. We're going to use that as a basis for the public's meeting, but for privacy issues regarding victims, that sort of thing, we'll have to do block of, just like the weekly crime reports that get sent out. So it won't be quite as detailed as what we discuss as the police department, but it will give the public a better idea, maps, charts, a lot of visuals to go along with what we send out through emails, myself and Kathy Plevy. But what you did get as a sample is a lot of what we are aiming to do with the public's version also. Like Chief Rakucci said, we're focusing on accountability with our officers And the whole idea of CompStat is directing personnel. So, I mean, it helps us as a department figure out where we need to send patrol and what we need to do as a department, but also to hold everyone accountable and to essentially reduce crime. I also think you got a copy of the Implementing CompStat in Tacoma Park. This was created with the help of the University of Maryland. As Chief Ricucci said, they've been great at holding trainings. They call me on the phone. They call Chief Ricucci on the phone. They did a great job evaluating what we've done so far and given us a lot of pointers. One of the main things that they had suggested is that we choose specific goals, and as you can see, the 4 specific goals that we are looking to focus primarily on, and these shouldn't be surprise. Number 1 is reduce street robbery. Number 2 is reduce theft from auto, which has been an extreme problem this summer. Number 3, reduce burglary citywide, identifying different types of burglary, your commercial versus your residential burglary. And the 4th is just reduce disorder citywide. This goal focuses on a lot of your quality of life issues, loitering, alcohol violations, some juvenile issues. But those are the 4 specific goals that when we start presenting to the public, which I guess the last Wednesday of this month is the first one, this is going to be what the focus of our meeting is about. However, if there are issues that are going on during that month before we have a meeting, obviously we'll focus on those too. We're going to spend a lot of time internally as a department focusing on persons. That's what we'll talk about. And we're finding a lot of the same individuals are committing crimes here as Washington, D.C. and Montgomery County. So that's going to be part of our focus and police meetings, but investigative techniques and whatnot that we discuss as a police department, we will aim to, talk about as much as we possibly can without hurting our investigation. So trying to keep the public informed a little more than what we do via all the internet, email, and postings on the website.
Questions?
Councilmember Snipper.
This is very cool. I'm really glad to hear this. The city's doing this. I had thought a lot of the data and information that you've been gathering and presenting to the city residents was very good. This is a step up, even higher than that. I noticed that you have 4 specific goals, and when I opened the presentation, I assumed I'd see maps of the 4 specific goals. Is there future plans to do that, to see how you're...
Well, when we've done our monthly meetings, we actually touch on all these. The specific goals actually, our last training was only a couple weeks ago, so we haven't had a CompStat meeting since then, so this is our new step forward on what exactly we're going to focus on instead of... We did a lot of widespread crime, which was great to let our officers know about, but from now on, these are going to be the issues that we're going to focus on the most, which is why there weren't any samples in here. Okay. But I do want to, what I did include in here is these are similar to maps that we look at in our meetings. There's 2 hotspot maps in there, and also a theft from vehicle and burglary map. And what we're trying to do is focus on certain areas that for that month are obvious issues, which is what the rings on each of the maps represent. But before we're just holding monthly meetings. I think the problem with that was the info wasn't timely enough, and we were looking at things that were occurring 4 weeks prior. So what we're looking to do now is hold them on a weekly basis. I think weekly or bi-weekly, that's the way the process is supposed to work, and it'll help us and it'll help the community with crime a lot better.
In our monthly meetings, we have the individual crimes like robberies, and shows what happened that month, and then she will also have a map that shows what's happened for 6 months, for the last 6 months. So we do have patterns, and that'll be a part of it. We get a package each month. We just gave you an example where we started. We've come a long ways, and we're obviously going into a different direction. The public meeting will be sensitized somewhat, but it will still show the crimes, which is public information. So we will have those maps, and that'll be something we'll explain, and then we'll explain to them what we're doing to try to prevent that crime or to solve it.
Very cool.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thanks for this presentation. As I look at the goals and then look through here in similar fashion, pages 8 and 9, two numbers caused me to comment. On page 9, of course, is the warnings going 154, 110 year to year, then 11,935, and I know that's part of the speed camera. So I would say that's the most dramatic of all the numbers in here. But on the other page, on page 8, I see that foot patrol is going up over the past couple of years, 274, 337, and 369. A little bit of bike patrols, and some other numbers in there. And I was just wondering if you could comment on whether the foot patrol or other numbers there represent a strategy to go towards your goals here.
And one of our budgetary goals was to increase our walking hours the last couple of years. Each year it's gone up. Our bike hours haven't gone up as far as I'd like it to, as the commanders know at this point. Some of the reasons were shortages this summer with some injuries and things knocked us back a little bit. But the walking thing has been consistent and continues to go up. I expect in every shift that the officers will get out of the car at least an hour or two, if they can, to walk through some of our shopping centers and residential neighborhoods. And that number is going up. That is one of our goals and objectives, as is the bicycle.
Thank you.
Councilmember Seaman.
Thank you, and thank you for being here tonight. I really welcome this new program, and I think it, again, is great. It demonstrates a strategic approach to addressing the crime in the city, and I think that's great. It's a nice professional approach, and I'm optimistic after reading what some of the other cities have experienced with this and what the FBI's expectations are. It sounds like a great program. I had one quick question, that is on page 8 under patrol statistics. It says that we do FIRs. What the heck is a FIR?
They're field interview reports. Our officers, they all have their tablets, basically, that have different fields that you can fill in. So when they make contact with a subject or an individual that's suspicious, or anyone that they come into contact with that they're not necessarily going to arrest, but in the future it might be helpful to have the name of the individual, their date of birth, their address and whatnot. They're a great, excellent source of information. We use them a lot in tracing burglary suspects. That's what they are, and you'll see that those numbers, since I think you have April's, have gone up. We've been stressing the importance of issuing them out, so that number is a good number to increase.
To give you an example, the thefts from autos, which is obviously run across all 6 wards, we've had details working at night. We've actually stopped people, got their name at like 3 o'clock in the morning. We've actually prevented, in my opinion, more thefts from occurring and several burglaries. And in several cases, we later made arrests 2 nights later from the same individual we'd stopped at 3 o'clock in the morning before he did something wrong because of our aggressive and active patrols. So it's criminal intelligence information, but it's obtained as a result of a stop. We're not just walking around and writing everybody up, because I know that's always a concern here in the city. But it's where we've made a stop in the middle of the night, or a situation where we probably caught them before they were going to do something, and take the information down to where they were at the time in case a report comes in later. In some cases, Kylene has actually identified people that we stopped and later were suspects and later were arrested, if that helps you understand a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah, I think there is a potential for concern there.
And that's why I wanted to make sure you understood.
I wonder if maybe we could get a breakdown of those 3 months by ward of where the FIRs are being taken, or maybe by beat would be better, since as you know they're better.
That'd be a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because I know right now, when they get entered into the system, they're designated by beat, so.
Yeah,
it's just
that would
a-
be fine. That just, thank you.
Councilmember Clay and then Councilmember Wright.
Thanks for coming. I love the reports that we've been getting since you came on board. Very informative. One of the things that is always surprising to me is when I read on the listserv that people's cars got broken into, and they left their car unlocked, and they left their wallet on the front seat, and their GPS in the window. And then they didn't call the police, probably because they were embarrassed. But it's just surprising the number of people that leave their car open, and I still try to remember every night to double-click my car remote control at the same time that I'm locking my door. But also, summer seems to have stopped, and we're into the cool weather, and it's now hotter in my house than it is outside, and so we've opened the windows, which is the other major way that burglars are getting in, through open windows and open doors, and people are more likely to leave their windows open. I wondered if you could say anything about crime patterns that are unique to the fall and things that people should be looking at, because I think one of the things is that I know when it starts to get darker, we've had an increase in crimes around the metro until we get kind of the first really good snow, and I wonder if we have enough pattern information on that to say anything about that or other things that people should watch out for in the fall. And the other question is, do we have I don't know if it's a 211 or a 311 system, but the reverse call system where if you have a suspect that you're looking for,
We have we
do
can
call
do
out?
the reverse 911 if we have an emergency. We can contact the county. We're part of the county system. We haven't used it. We haven't had a situation where it's been brought to my attention that it would be worth doing it at this point. We've been pretty lucky. We haven't had a serious situation. Concerning the fall, obviously we increase, as it gets darker earlier, we increase patrols around Metro Station. We had a pretty successful year last year as a result of some of the activities we're doing. We're going to obviously continue into the fall. Obviously, we did have a series of burglaries this summer. We have made arrests. If you've noticed, there's been no more reported. We're in the process of closing a multitude of cases. Matter of fact, we had them in our lobby tonight. We brought in a lot of our residents to look at the stolen property we've recovered. Obviously, in the fall, you've got to be careful when you do leave your windows up. If you go out, especially first-level windows, if you're leaving your house, obviously that's a way for crime to occur. We're hoping with the start of school, some of the activity that occurred this summer did involve young people. We're hoping that will stop with the beginning of school again. But the latest arrest we made has stopped the burglaries. The thefts, we've made a lot of arrests, but there's still people out there that did them this summer. We didn't get them all. And we're obviously continuing patrols in the city for that because it's still a serious problem. It seems to be the crime of choice now for a lot of our criminals, breaking into
cars. Yeah.
And, you were the best crime prevention. You can't leave stuff in your car out in the open. If you lock your car and you've got a GPS sitting in there on the front seat or CDs, your purse, your checkbook, these are different things that have been reported this summer. Cash, you're making it easy for the criminals, and, we're not trying to put it on all our residents, but good crime prevention tips will stop some of these crimes. And we obviously live in a society today where we have to be a little bit more careful than, may have been 20, 30, 40 years ago where you grew up and you could leave the doors unlocked. And
my grandmother left the keys to her car in the floorboard of her car, and the only reason they took them out of the ignition is they used to leave them in the ignition, and a 2-year-old got in one of the cars and drove it down the road. And after that, everyone in the town put their cars in the floorboard instead of the ignition.
Were you the 2-year-old?
No, I was not. Unfortunately, that's one problem I didn't cause there. But yeah, it's a different world.
I do have to say, though, knock on wood, since the kids did go back to school this weekend, I got no reports for theft from vehicles. So that's huge because, I've been getting them left and right, so it's a good thing when I come back from a long weekend and I have no reports in my mailbox.
So maybe Arnie Duncan's year-round school proposal has some other side effects that we hadn't considered. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Wright.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for this approach and program. I've been an advocate of talking to the community more, and in particular doing exactly what you're doing here, which is not only telling them about their crimes that are occurring, but really going deeper into what you guys are doing to solve them. And I think people have lots of questions about that. They know that the police force is working hard, but they do want more information around what we're doing, what you're doing to solve the crime, so thanks for that. I was curious if what we saw in terms of the increase in auto thefts was specific to Tacoma Park, or did you hear from surrounding jurisdictions a similar?
Montgomery County got killed. If you think we had it bad, they had it even worse. It's been generally the whole area. The Council of Governments Chiefs Committee commented on it. This has been one of the worst years we've had for thefts from autos in many years. They've run away from some of the other crimes, which is probably the good news. Robberies have went way down in the city. Burglaries were up this summer, but the thefts have been the biggest thing area-wide. But as the criminals tell us, because we always interview criminals, what can we do to stop you from doing this? It's become a lot easier. I mean, we had I think I brought it up, I know you did to Barb, that we had a group that was locked up in Bethesda from Baltimore, and they said, what are you doing over here? We were told Bethesda's a place to come, and I imagine there's some word that gets out that, there's certain places in Tacoma Park's a place to come, and that's what we've heard. We're making it easy for them. That's why we got to make it harder, and that's where our citizens come in. And I'm hoping by doing CompStat, they'll see the things we're doing and how they can help us, to reduce crime.
And when is the license plate scanner supposed to come on board? Because I imagine if you had a hot spot and you thought that the crimes were somehow associated with also a stolen auto being used, that it might make sense to place the license plate scanner car in that hotspot area. When are we slated to have that come
We are
on?
hoping to have it in the next 30 days. We're piggybacking on a contract with Arlington County, and hopefully we'll be able to purchase through there. But Captain Corsi's in the process right now of working out the paperwork that has to go through that. We'll obviously have to bring it before council.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
While I have you here, I'll ask a not CompStat-related question.
That's out of order.
I know, but please permit me to do it. The emails that you send around are really terrific, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from residents about them. They think it has enough information for somebody who lives nearby to know whose house was broken into, but if you didn't, it protects anonymity pretty well. But one of the things that does not appear in those is, I'll call them other incidents. We had one in Ward 5 where somebody hit a fire hydrant and caused a major flooding. And I assume that the police department gets notified about these or knows about them because it flooded Sligo Creek. It was quite a lovely scene there. And those kinds of things don't actually show up in the reports, but a lot of citizens would like to see them. I just wondered about your thoughts on stuff like that.
Information that comes to both myself, which obviously goes to Kathy Plevy, we look at and we put out. I mean, when there's a major incident going on within the city and I'm notified on it, generally I will have her put something out where she's notified by the officers. They generally know something that's going to affect, the general welfare of the city. I like to get at, but they're pretty good at getting most information to us. Sometimes I don't get the information because they're handling it on the street at the time, and they feel if they've got it under control that there's no reason to put out something press-wise. But we do talk about this in our staff meetings, making sure that all the information that we need to get out immediately through Kathy. And I would tell you that I probably feel like we get most of everything out there. Once in a while something will slip by, but the officers believe they've handled it at night, and that's part of, delegating your managers to handle things, what they think should go out and what doesn't go out. We don't get everything out. Sometimes it comes back to us, questions like you have, because it's under control by the time we put it out, so they don't see it as an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move to our special session, and the first item is a first reading ordinance providing for the 2009 city election. City clerk, want to say anything about that?
I'd like to say a few things. This is the first reading ordinance setting forth the nominating caucus and city election. It sets forth all the details, and it's an ordinance that, similar to one you adopt every 2 years. The nominating caucus is scheduled, as per the city charter, for September 29th at 7:30. It'll be in the Azalea Room. After the first reading, I have an envelope with ward numbers in, and I'm hoping the city manager will once again select the order of wards from that envelope. The again, in this election, IRV, instant runoff voting, the option will be there to rank candidates by order of choice. Again, the election will be conducted using paper ballots. For this election, we will be having Scantegrity available so that voters will be scanning their ballots. After they fill in their ballots, voters will be scanning them. And so our initial results on election evening will be the result of those scanned ballots. And then there will also be a hand count the next day as part of really the Scantegrity as a verification for that. So they will come in and do a hand count the next day, but we will have results pretty quickly that evening, assuming all goes well. This election will be the first one that allows no-fault absentee voting so that any voter may vote by absentee ballot if they wish. And I will have the applications available soon, and as soon as the ballots are ready after the nominating caucus, it'll take a week or two. They'll be available to send out to voters who wish to vote by absentee ballot. And that runs up through really election day. And let's see what else. Also, voters will be able to cast a provisional ballot. If a voter comes in and their name is not on the voter roll, but they feel that they are registered to vote, they can vote by provisional ballot, just as you do in the regular state and federal elections. And then we'll confirm the next day whether that voter's vote can be counted. And I think that's essentially, I think that covers it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
The absentee ballots will be scanned?
They will be scanned after the polls close. Absentee ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. on election evening, and then they'll be scanned, opened and scanned after, by the election judges after the
So they'll be part of the count that will
They
be
will.
released after when the election is over,
Yes.
rather than held till the next day or something?
No, they'll be part of the initial count that evening.
Only the provisional ballots will be,
They would be next day.
Councilmember Smith.
One question about the counting of provisional ballots. If it's done the next day, if you release a count the night of the election and there's one provisional ballot, then you will know how that person voted.
Oh, what an interesting question.
I don't, I don't have a solution, but I raise it as an issue. I once, just to give you an example, I once was able to see my vote counted because I was the only one who voted
But
in that case.
how did you know you were the only provisional?
If there was only
There was
one.
only one.
There was
There was only one. Many years ago.
Just by
But would
itself.
anyone else know that you were the only provisional? I mean, you're not named or something.
That's right, I'm not named, that's right.
I'll
But
get
you
back
will
to
know
you
who
on
it is
that.
because you're verifying.
Right, we would know who it was. I'll get back to you on that before second reading.
Okay.
Councilmember Victoria.
On the no-fault absentee, if you are a non-citizen resident of Tacoma Park, you would need to come to the city to register before you could fill out a no-fault absentee. I'm just wondering how we're going to verify that someone lives in the city.
Sure, and any voter has to be registered to vote by absentee ballot. So-
Including people who don't have a Montgomery County registration.
Yes, voters have to be registered. The voter registration deadline is October 5th, and anyone who wishes to vote in the election, whether a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen resident of the city, needs to be registered by that date.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
Well, I'd like to move the ordinance, and I guess I would suggest that if there are enough provisional ballots to sway the result, that you wouldn't release the count until you had confirmed all the provisional ballots.
That may be the answer. If it's that close, that the 3 provisional ballots might, we would certainly have a very close election if that were to occur. Right. If it's too close to call, it's too close to call, and then the results get released the next day. I think that's true. That would make sense. But I'm going to, let me think about it, talk to the Board of Elections, and we'll come back with more information.
Councilmember Robinson, Councilmember Siemens.
I remember it as Ann Sargent. Was she the one who was kind of in charge of the Scantegrity effort? I believe so.
She's the chair of the Board of Elections,
Right.
and at this point, yes.
I met with her about the Scantegrity system. I was impressed, and she said that it was a somewhat kind of cutting edge and not mainstream, but rather coming from a university system and then some other support. I wonder if, and that was 6 or 8 months ago, as I recall, maybe it was a year ago. I wonder if there has been continuing expansion or success of this system, to your knowledge.
We would be the first binding election that they have dealt with. But I think it's important to note that our election will be held as our election always has been. I mean, the only difference will be, and the votes will be scanned, and 2 years ago we scanned ballots, but they were done at the end of the election instead of by the voters. The difference is that with the Scantegrity system, when voters mark their ballots, they'll use those a marker that reveals a code that the voter, if he or she chooses, can write down and check on the web the next day or later that evening. And by checking that, they can ensure that their vote was counted. It won't show how they voted, but it will show how it was counted. So it's a way of verifying that their vote was counted.
Right.
It won't impact in any way the results or the count so much. They are working with us on that because they wanted the opportunity to participate in a binding election with this system. So we're giving them the opportunity to try this in a binding election, and in return, they're providing the scanning system and election support for no cost.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I would like to second the moving of this ordinance. But I would like to continue the discussion about the Scantegrity. As I recall, when we did that test some time ago, I don't recall the council really spending a lot of time talking about the results of that test and how some of those concerns have been resolved that were expressed by those city residents who participated in the test. One of the concerns that I recall from that was that the Scantegrity system made things simpler from an election judge's perspective because it made counting of the results much easier. But I think that one of the complaints was that the system made things a little bit more complex for the voters, and that they had lengthy instructions before voting. There were, was a special pen with a code, and then instructions on how to go to the internet to read your results and see whether your vote was really counted as you had cast it. And I remember at the time my concern was that although that might be fine for many voters, there are some voters who are somewhat intimidated by the process itself and that this added complexity may be overwhelming to some people and may actually be a hindrance to some people's voting. And I just wondered, in the intervening time, I'm disappointed that the council hasn't heard more about that or discussed it more. I just wonder if those things are resolved, or if those are potential problems that remain.
I think the Board of Elections has, I can say, the Board of Elections has been working with Scantegrity, and those problems are resolved. The Scantegrity, remember that the Scantegrity part is really an add-on. It's purely optional in terms of whether a voter chooses to check online. The only thing that's not optional is when you mark your ballot, that little code is revealed, but it doesn't really change the way you vote. There are some extra instructions, but our intention is to not focus in a large way on that. There won't be anything like the level of explanation that you saw in the mock election. I mean, that certainly showed that it was absolutely overwhelming, the amount of information that people were getting, and you won't see that in the election. It will be much more seamless.
Right, I think we do have to be sensitive to the fact that some people may feel confused or overwhelmed should they be getting too much information. You know, making an X may be enough for them.
Right. I understand that. We're definitely taking that into consideration.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
If I can just say that I'm glad that we do have a Board of Elections now for dealing with some of those issues, and they can concentrate on that as needed and work out some of those details. So I have every reason to believe that if they had, in their analysis, come up with any difficulties, that they would have brought that to our attention. We could have discussed it.
I'll withdraw my disappointment.
Councilmember Wright.
What was the name of the company that we used the previous election?
True Ballot.
True Ballot. So I guess after these two experiences, we can have some comparisons, see how they go, and assess whether we want to, or the Board of Elections can assess whether they want to continue Scantegrity.
Right.
Do we have any, we're just doing one election site again, right? We're just doing...
Right, I didn't mention that. The community center will again be the only polling place for the election.
Do we have money specifically budgeted to make sure there's transportation from wards that are further away, buses, or?
We have arranged to have the city bus available to transport residents. I'd be very anxious to hear thoughts from the council as to how best to utilize that bus service. But we have the bus driver on call from I think 9:30 to 4 for those midday voters who need transportation to the polls. But we need we assume Victory Tower and the Franklin. If there are other locations, I'd be happy to hear about how best to accommodate other voters who may need transportation, whether it be a swing through the city at a certain time through a specified route. But I'd be anxious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be an advantage, especially in some of the outlying areas. I think of the Pinecrest neighborhood, which has many people who don't have transportation, depend on public transportation, and may opt out of voting just because of the inconvenience. But I think it's paramount that we get a plan together and start getting it advertised so that people know what's available.
And remember with that anyone can vote by absentee ballot. So if they think it's inconvenient, they can vote.
Absentee ballots aren't necessarily convenient, though. I mean, it's another approach, but it's has some. It requires them to do more than just write a letter to mom.
Yeah.
When is the absentee ballot available?
Well, after the nominating caucus, the Friday after the nominating caucus, we'll know for sure what the ballots need to look like. And so then the ballots will be in production. I'm thinking about a week after, so September 29th is the nominating caucus, I think, 30. October 1 is the deadline. So somewhere between October 7th or 10th, or definitely by mid-October, they'll be available.
And we'll do the typical insert into the speaker's letter that we've done in the past, which comes with the election.
Yes.
There'll be information in there about that.
Absolutely.
And will that
Yes.
be in English and Spanish?
Yes.
Thank you.
We will also be, this year, for the first time, at least the first time in my memory, doing a mailing to every registered voter with a sample ballot. And we haven't done that before, but I'm hoping that will help boost our turnout.
Any other questions? Is there any public comment on this first reading ordinance providing for the city election? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Mayor Williams, if we could just take a moment and have the city manager draw the
Yes.
the ordinance.
I can't see.
Ward 5, Ward 1, Ward 6, Ward 2, Jesse, you really folded these things well. Ward 4, and certainly not, last but not least, Ward 3.
Okay. So we now know the order for the nominating caucus. The next item is the first reading ordinance authorizing FY 2010 budget amendment number 1. City manager would like to make any comments on that we need?
Sure, I'll just give a kind of an overview. The detail is contained in the ordinance itself. There were a number of grant-funded projects that were not completed as of June 30th, and the FY10 budget needs to be adjusted, specifically the Special Revenue Fund, to reflect the financial activity that will therefore take place this fiscal year. That equates to about a roughly $275,000 increase in both Special Revenue Fund revenues and the same amount in expenditures. There were also several general fund projects that were not completed as of the end of the last fiscal year, including the Park Avenue parking lot project. We ran into some very rainy weather last spring, as you may recall, and that project was unable to be completed. And there were also certain marketing activities related to the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative that carried over into this fiscal year. That will require a transfer from the general contingency account of just about $28,000. Essentially, it's a timing issue. Money that we thought would be spent last year will instead be spent this year. The council may recall that with Safe Tacoma, we had given them a grant of $75,000. Part of the wording in the memorandum of understanding between the city and Safe Tacoma was that any monies that were not expended as of the end of the fiscal year would be returned to the city. They returned just under $25,000 to us, and so the finance director and I agree that there should probably be an adjustment in general fund revenues to reflect the receipt of those monies. We talked about this when I did the fourth quarter financial report. We had expected to get a contribution from WSSC. Last fiscal year, this was part of the road resurfacing cost-sharing agreement that we entered into. That took a little longer to enter into than we had hoped, so rather than receiving the money last fiscal year, it will be received in FY10. So we will be receiving roughly $180,000 from WSSC. And then, as we already talked about at the beginning of this evening's council meeting, like other municipalities, we took a 90% hit in our highway user revenues and a fairly sizable cut in our state police aid. Combined, that results in a revenue loss in the general fund of about $577,000. The net increase between the monies from Safe Tacoma, the WSSC, and the cuts from the state will result in a reduction in general fund revenues net of about $372,000. So that's sort of an overview of what's covered in this budget amendment. I would mention, we just got it today, is the council had previously authorized me to sign a settlement agreement with TRG Construction. They were the general contractors, you may recall, for the second phase of the community center project. I signed that earlier today. So when this comes before you for second reading, there will be a change in the ordinance to basically account for that payment to TRG Construction in accordance with that settlement agreement.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, second by Councilmember Wright. Any comments, any questions? I'll just note that with the additional money to TRG, that the general contingency amount will be more likely in the neighborhood of $35,000 when we get the second reading.
That's correct.
And given the tighter budgeting that we did this year, that means that there's basically no contingency. And then when you look at other potential losses from the state, you see why things are tight. Is there any public comment on budget ordinance number 1? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will now move to the 2-item consent agenda with the remaining items, the single reading ordinance approving purchase of a leaf collection vacuum and the resolution supporting Montgomery County's purchase of 8312 and 8316 Flower Avenues. Would somebody like to move the consent agenda?
Move the consent agenda.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Wright. Since we have a single reading ordinance on the consent agenda, will the clerk please call a roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. We will now move to formerly item A on the consent agenda, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for legislative advocate. Councilmember Snipper.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Snipper.
The reason I had it removed was just to let the public have an opportunity, if they wanted to comment on this, because as I understand it, the contract is for 1 year with an opportunity to be renewed for up to 4 years. So that's a 5-year in total. So that's a $100,000 purchase, and I thought something as big as that should not be on the consent agenda. But I have no problem with it.
Councilmember Wright.
That's to be reviewed annually, right? So we re-up it. It's not like next year we would do it for 4 years. It's every year we can decide.
That's correct. It would be each renewal would be subject to review by the city, basically contingent upon both budgetary constraints as well as the performance of the firm. So if you were unhappy at any point, or we just simply didn't have the money to hire an outside lobbyist, you would have the discretion not to enter into a new contract.
And we'll at some future date actually talk directly with the lobbyists about what our priorities are and what we want them to be looking out for.
Yeah, that's correct.
And this is the lobbyist that we first hired last year and had a fair amount of happiness with the process and the results.
They were extremely beneficial last year, and I'm not sure how we would have gotten through the legislative session without their help.
And
Councilmember Robinson.
in the event that some even better lobbyist appears on the horizon, this is just a what if, does this make it more difficult for us to consider other lobbyists if that were something that we wanted to do?
No, I think certainly the reason that we had put the opportunity for contract extensions is that we would not have to go back through a bid process. If you did just happen to know of another firm, in all likelihood, depending on the amount of that contract, it would trigger basically doing another RFP process. But you would certainly have the opportunity to do that if you so chose.
Thank you.
Okay. Any public comment on this single reading ordinance? Seeing none, will clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. We will now move to former consent agenda item C, the resolution approving the development of housing in the city, Gilbert Highlands, 8508 to 10 Flower Avenue, for financing by Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development through the Department's Community Development Administration.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Snipper. Questions?
My only question is, I thought it was a large item and wanted the public to have an opportunity to comment.
Is there anything that Department Director Daines wants to say?
I would just like to clarify that the resolution that's included in your agenda packet and you're being asked to consider this evening is required by the state of Maryland, and they are requiring that of all of the applicants that are submitting requests for funding. It's essentially an endorsement of the project that MHP has in progress on Flower Avenue. It does not involve any commitment of city resources, but merely that the city has been made aware of the project and that you endorse it and support the project as proposed. If they are successful in securing funding, they'll get about $1.2 million, $1.3 million from two various agencies at the state level.
Any further questions from the council? Is there any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. That passes unanimously. We will now take a short break, and that clock is 6 minutes. Do that, Barb? Is Sarah going to introduce, or
Yes, she should be.
where is she? She didn't believe that we were going to start at 9:30?
Marjorie, is Sarah behind you? Okay.
We started. Thank you for coming. Sounds good. Next item.
If everything was that easy. That's okay.
Can I ask a prior question?
Sure.
What we have in our packets, is this a revised?
We have both the old one and the new one.
The current agreement should be in the front and the,
Okay.
And that's why it has out-of-date names.
Yeah, that was.
and the other one has the draft. And there have been changes since that, because we kicked it over to the attorneys, and now they're doing their attorney.
Thank you.
Joining me this evening is Jan McEwen, who is the housing manager for Montgomery County's Housing and Code Enforcement, and Margie Saccone, who you're familiar with, who is in charge of our Code Enforcement Division, and Cynthia Lundy, who is the field supervisor and oversees all the inspectors that are assigned to Tacoma Park. Many of you were here in 2003, though not all of you, when the city entered into an agreement with Montgomery County to take over the inspections of the rental housing properties. And in the interim, that's worked out really fabulously from our perspective, and I hope from theirs as well, in terms of coordinating services between the two agencies and improved communications, and it's allowed us to access their expertise and overall improve the quality of the rental housing of the Tacoma Park. In 2003, when we were doing all the inspections ourselves, we had 5 inspectors on staff. We have 2 currently, and we tapped into enormous resources as far as their inspection staff, and it's worked out very well. The original agreement was for an initial 2-year term, and it allowed for 3 additional 2-year extensions. We'll be closing, we've gone and extended the contract twice since then. The current contract expires the end of September, and we can go into our 3rd 2-year extension. However, there have been so many changes in the law, and as we've gone through this process, we've refined some of the procedures that I felt it was appropriate to come back to the council with a revised agreement so that it more accurately reflected the law and some of the procedural changes that we've made. I've highlighted them in the cover memo, and basically it's the proposed new agreement would start on October 1st, 2009, and would be for a 3-year period with 3 additional 3-year options for renewal. It reflects all the changes in the code that have been made since the city initially entered into the agreement with the county. Several of you may recall that we went through and recodified the city's ordinances, and all the numbers are changed and everything like that. It also expands the inspection services to be provided by the county to include illegally operated rental facilities. That was sort of a vague area that wasn't specifically addressed in the original agreement. And it allows the city, on occasion, though not always, to go in and do a quick and dirty inspection of a property where there's been a bulk trash dumped on the boulevard that needs to be taken care of, and it's easier for us to just go in and issue a citation or make arrangements to have it picked up rather than to bring the county back down for that one particular item. The other change to the agreement that I forgot to include on the cover memo is that it incorporates a clean and lean process whereby the county could contract with the Public Works Department to go in and pick up the trash, mow the lawn, and remove other debris from the site for a fee that would expedite that process. We can,
Our
Public Works Department for a fee.
Who would contract with us, with our Public Works?
If the county came out to a rental property and there were some clean and lean types of activities that needed to be done on the outside, say 36 Philadelphia,
I understand.
they could come and...
Just to pick
one. And in fact, that is one of the very first ones, and that started the whole discussion in the process. We can do it because of our size and some of the flexibility we have. We can do it a little faster than they can. We still have to go through the same legal requirements and the same notification requirements, but we can get the folks out there and get it taken care of.
My question is, our Public Works would be doing the clean and lean.
Correct.
Who's asking them to do it?
The county would ask that the clean and lean be done under certain circumstances.
I see. So they could hire our
Public Works
the
staff.
county inspectors could hire our Public Works to do
staff.
clean and lean.
Right.
That's all I wanted to
Yeah.
get clear of.
And there's been, Daryl has identified the cost associated with that, so it's a fee that's based on the number of hours that it takes, what the dumping fees are, things like that. And the way it's phrased in the agreement that we're asking you to consider gives us flexibility to increase that cost as expenses are change. So we have some flexibility. The rest of the changes that are incorporated in the agreement, quite frankly, are more housekeeping in terms of refining or clarifying some of the processes that we use as far as notifying each other of when we've gotten complaints, when reports are due, that type of thing. I've asked the county staff here this evening to give you an update in terms of what they're doing, some of their observations, the workload that they've undertaken on your behalf. Again, as I noted in the memorandum, we've been extremely pleased with the quality of services that the county has been able to provide under this agreement. And bringing it back to the council this evening is not an indication of any dissatisfaction with that service, merely an opportunity to clarify the agreement so that we're all working under the right rules and appropriate code rules. So if you have any questions about the draft agreement, I'll be glad to answer them now, or you can wait until later, or I can just turn it over to Dan and Cynthia to have them give you an update.
Can you clarify one thing on the fiscal impact? It looks like the cost is going down by almost $30,000.
Correct.
How's that?
I'm not going to explore that at all.
I'm not complaining.
I'm not either. Back in February or March, I had asked the county to give me what the numbers would be for FY10 and FY11 so that I could include it in the budget. And those are the numbers that were cited at that particular time.
Never mind. Councilmember Robinson.
I'm curious about the inspecting of illegal apartments. If they're illegal, why do they need to be inspected? They're not in business, right?
Oh, I wish it was that easy.
You obviously haven't had one.
Not everyone is as diligent about filling out the paperwork as is needed if one is operating on a rental facility. And the way the original agreement was worded, it presumed that everyone that we wanted to have the property inspected had followed through and submitted an application, which then starts the ball rolling as far as the inspection process. Some people are less timely in submitting that application after we notify them, but that it's been brought to our attention that they're operating an illegal rental facility. And this would give the county the authority to go in and inspect it to verify one that was rental and to get the ball rolling as far as the licensing procedure.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. That raised a question of how would they make the determination that the place was an illegal rental and that they could go in and inspect it?
The city's ordinance gives the city and or its agent the authority to go in and inspect rental properties or facilities.
But if it's not a registered rental facility or property, then how do you know? I certainly, as much as I may like the county representatives who are here, don't want them coming into my house just because they think somebody may be renting there. There must be some kind of a...
There are a variety of triggering mechanisms. Typically, and this happened to me on Friday at 5:20, where you get a call from someone who's expressing frustration with their landlord. I think in her particular case, there were creatures living up in the attic, and the landlord wasn't doing anything about it. So as I'm talking to this particular person and finding out, okay, what they need to do and all of that, I pull up the license database, and there's no rental license there, but this is a tenant. So sometimes it's generated by complaints from the tenants that are living there. Sometimes it's generated by complaints from next door because the tenants have not maintained the property appropriately, or they have other concerns regarding their behavior. Council members will contact us occasionally. Real estate agents will contact us. I mean, we get a variety of information. It's not just going down the street and saying, I want to go
So
to
it
that
would be, so in theory, be a tenant who is inviting the county to come in to do this inspection.
In theory, it's a tenant that's advising us that it is that it's a rental facility and it's operating illegally. And in those circumstances, we would need to go in and inspect it.
Okay. Would you contact the owner first?
Yes.
To set up a date for the inspection?
Yeah. All of the inspections are scheduled in partnership with the landlord or the agent.
I have two other things that I'd like to discuss, but I'm not sure where whether this is the right point in time to do it, or do you want to let the...
Maybe I'll ask the county folks, do you all want to present anything to us? Or?
I'll just give you a couple little stats that I ran earlier today. over the past 4 years, for single-family complaints, they've dropped to about 60% over what we did back in 2004. So based on our efforts and, the landlords and everything else down here in the city, they're starting to come around to, if you don't get things taken care of, we're going to come down and give you citations and so forth. For multifamily annual inspections, resulted in about a third less properties that received citations in the past 4 years. So back in in 2004, there were about 31 properties that received citations here in the city, and in 2007 there were 10. So that's a significant number of either properties being sold, transferred, different tenants, different management companies coming in. So it's definitely becoming a positive attitude towards the folks down here, landlords and such. So it's a big improvement where it was when we first got it.
If I might expand on that, and Margie has made this observation as well. Many of you maybe know that we do monthly seminars for the landlords as part of the licensing process. You have to be certified. And when we first started the certification process, it was soon after we entered into the contract with the county. Man, we spent more time talking about the county inspection process and the code complaints than we did on anything else. Now it's dropped down to a fraction of the amount of time that we spent. So the landlords are becoming more familiar with what the basic property maintenance code standards are. And over the course of time, the properties have been brought up to a standard that there are fewer code violations than there were initially. And again, I attribute a lot of that to the consistency of the inspections that the county inspectors are conducting, the consistency with how they're dealing with various violations, and their professionalism in terms of doing a thorough job and following through on a particular property, be it a license inspection or a complaint inspection from one end to the other. And I hadn't realized that the citations went down that dramatically, but that's very good.
Also, too, I have 5 inspectors down here along with 1 supervisor. It's not full-time down here, but it's definitely, showing that, we go into these larger complexes as a team of 5 or 6 folks and get them knocked out as quick as we can, going over and over and over. So, things are definitely working out well down here with the city staff and so forth.
Good. Other questions? Councilmember Robinson.
How many inspections do you do in a year?
A year? Maybe at least.
It's approximately 3,200, if I remember the numbers that we pulled for the budget.
Okay.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. In this time of economic stress on governments, I think it's good to hear that the price tag this year is lower than it was in the past. But I've wondered, as a landlord, and your people have come to visit my properties and done a good job. I appreciate the work you've done, but it has struck me that there's an opportunity to maybe save some money for properties that are where the tenant is in a subsidized housing program, because, for example, the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County also does a housing inspection, and it seems to be duplicative to have 2 housing inspections. And I wonder if that isn't an area where we could save some money by not doing those additional housing inspections where it is an HOC tenant that is residing there, knowing that HOC is going to be doing the housing inspection. So I'd just like to explore that possibility.
Well, basically, the county enforces Chapter 26 of the Housing Code. HOC handles a separate code that they enforce. It's called the QES.
Quality Housing
Quality Housing Standards for HUD. They're totally different code. And that's something that the city wants. We're here to 4, Chapter 26, which is a higher standard of code than the QES standard.
There's also the challenge of getting paperwork and documentation. I mean, there are different expectations. HOC, for example, if you don't pass your housing quality standards inspection, you don't get a contract. They don't follow it through in terms of establishing an abatement date.
Right, they're not going to...
Notice of violation, doing the citation, and carrying it through to that end.
Right, you're going to lose your tenant.
Right, you lose your tenant, you lose the rent. Whereas with the agreement that we have with the county and doing it based on the same standard, we have that legal process in place. And it's a more streamlined process than it is working with HOC on occasion.
Okay, it's still duplicative. I think it would be helpful to me if it was possible to get a copy of the two standards so that we could see how different they are or how similar they are.
We can do that. I can also contact HOC to see what happens after they conduct an inspection and a unit doesn't pass the inspection. If, for example, a unit were to fail, my initial assumption would be that we would still have to send somebody out there to do the inspection so that it followed through on the city's code, and that we had to do,
If they lost a tenant, obviously, then they wouldn't have an HOC subsidized tenant anymore, and so it would fall back on the other requirement for the other inspection.
Councilmember Clay.
So when HUD has a uniform standard across the country, so they're looking at kind of the big picture pieces, but Montgomery County has other things that they would add for safety and locality issues that are more specific and more related to like building and engineering and electrical and those types of safety things. And HUD is a broader, like, these are the kinds of things that a rental unit should have just in general kind of across the country. They also, in most places, use contractors. Do county staff do the HUD inspections? No. They're done by contractors, aren't they?
Not contractors.
The other thing to keep in mind is that when the county goes through it, they also look at it in terms of making sure that it complies with the zoning ordinance. That if it's an accessory apartment, it's gone through and been inspected to meet all of those requirements. They go through and they do the entire building, whereas with HOC it may be one unit in a 6-unit building, and they only pay attention to that one unit rather than the other 5 that are in the building. So, I mean, we can investigate that as a possibility, but on the surface it's not something that we would necessarily support, at least at this point in time.
I think it was worth discussing. I had one other thing, and first of all, I would like to compliment you on the work. I think, many people, many of the tenants are very happy with the work that you do. And, I don't know how much you pay attention to kind of some of the difficulties that tenants face, but, for tenants in Montgomery County, it's very difficult for them to complain about the landlord too strongly because the landlord at the end of the lease can just say, we don't want you here anymore. So they, in theory and in law, they can't retaliate against the tenant, but in practice, it's pretty easy just to say, I don't want you here anymore. So your dedication to being the voice, excuse me, being a voice for the tenants is important. There are a number of tenants, though, that I hear from who are concerned that the landlords, as much as the landlords are told in our training program that they have to give a 48-hour notice before coming into the apartments to do inspections, and as often as the letters come out from your office advising the landlords to be sure you've given your 48-hour notice, there are a number of tenants who complain that that is regularly disregarded, and that the inspector shows up and the landlord says, they're here to do the inspection and they haven't given the adequate notice. I would like to see us add into this agreement that the there has to be some demonstration that that 48-hour notice has been given. Because without that, there is no recourse for the tenant. And in fact, there was one complaint this year alleging that one of your inspectors and a landlord called a Tacoma Park Police to force their way into the apartment to do the inspection, even though allegedly the 48-hour notice had not been given. So I think in the interest of protecting the tenants' rights, there should be something in here requiring the landlord to provide some evidence that the notice has been properly given.
We can investigate some of the possibilities with that. Just as an informational piece, Margie and Linda Walker attended the four roll calls with the police officers, just giving them sort of a refresher course on what the basic laws are regarding tenant rights and what code enforcement does. And that was one of the issues that came up. And I believe, I'm quite confident that that will not happen again.
Yeah, but I know that when someone from your office was here and talking with the council, they said that it's not always, that the complaints are not always followed up with the landlords, and that the landlords are not held accountable for that notice when, in fact, they haven't given the notice. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there some way we can put a little bit more teeth into it so that we can serve the tenants in a little better way?
We'll investigate what language we might be able to include.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
There is, just as a caveat for the 48-hour notice, that's for the licensing inspections like that. If a tenant calls you up as a landlord and says, my faucet is leaking, can you come fix it? They can come in and do that because the tenant has actually asked for that particular repair work. So the 48-hour notice is not a fast and hard rule. It applies to inspections. But there will be occasions when the landlord does have access to the unit.
Sure, or if the downstairs is leaking water through the ceiling.
Yeah, pipes break and
right.
that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
Just on the joining the inspections together, I'm sure HOC is a great organization right now, but historically across the country it hasn't always been the case that housing authorities or city housing departments have been great at treating their tenants or making sure that tenants' rights are abided by, or and that tenants are living in good, have good living conditions. So if we were to do something like that, I would at least want a sampling to happen every year, so that if there were issues, we would become aware of them and would be able to change back. But it sounds like there's probably too much of a conflict between what our code standards are versus HUD, but that would be a concern I would just voice.
And the other thing is, and I'll have to confirm the number, but if I recall correctly, when I last asked Gene Kerr how many vouchers we actually had out there in Tacoma Park, it's like 148 or something like that. So it's not a huge number of units that are actually under contract with HOC. So there may be some economies of scale there, but there are no economies of scale.
And will you just remind me, when we did it the OA, we had 5 full-time staff people doing it, is that right? And since we've done it this way, we've saved money and the process has gotten improved, but we generally all acknowledge that the process has improved, right?
Dramatic.
And we only have 1 staff person now on staff dealing with this as a full-time.
We have Margie Saccone, who oversees the contract with the county and does the actual issuance of the licenses. And then we have a program assistant who processes all of the paperwork. And it's very time-consuming. That part is very time-consuming. So a majority of his time is spent on that. But from actual inspectors, I believe when I first started here, we had an equivalent to Margie and 4 inspectors that did rental housing inspection.
And the cost has actually gone down pre versus now.
The fees that are assessed for the licensing program essentially pay for the whole program, plus the additional cost for general administrative oversight, finance expenses, that type of
If I can just point out a little bit of the history that when I first got involved with the city, I think the county was doing the inspections. Folks in the city were not happy with how the county was doing inspections. The city took it over. Then eventually we weren't happy with how the city was doing the inspections and handed it back to the county. So there have been various levels of satisfaction and dissatisfaction over a period of time with any number of ways as far as how this has been set up.
Thanks for that.
And right now, we're very, very
Did I hear you say correctly that you're thinking about changing in the new agreement to go from 2-year renewals to 3-year renewals?
Correct.
Unless there's some strong reason to do that, I prefer the 2-year because I think that aligns with the city council terms, and so it makes it easier. For some reason, the council wanted to make a policy change. It's aligned with a term of the council kind of seeing the contract run for 2 years, having that information, getting input from you, and renewing or not. So that's my basic reason for liking the 2 versus 3. But if there was some burning reason why we wanted to do 3, I would be open to discussing.
I proposed it merely as just a time saver. There is a clause in the agreement, both the original and the proposed agreement, that does allow either the county or the city to give a 90-day notice to terminate the agreement. And that could happen tomorrow if that was the case. So I'll talk to Linda Perlman, and it makes sense to do that in 2 weeks.
I'll go down to this end in a second, but I did want to follow up on the earlier discussion that Councilmember Siemens started about the HOC inspections and the county inspections. And what I took away from the explanation of the differences and how they work is that I would be much happier continuing to have the county do all the inspections. And from my point of view, and I'd be happy to hear from my colleagues, that I wouldn't want staff putting time into investigating, maybe having the possibility of HOC doing the inspections. I think that would be going in the wrong direction. So any comments that anybody wants to make to that point so that we can give staff clear direction on that? And Councilmember Victoria, then Councilmember Robinson, then Councilmember Simper.
I concur with you. I think we've heard enough about the differences between the federal inspector needs and priorities and ours that it's not worthwhile. I just wanted to clarify a point on something Councilmember Siemens was picking up about this particular incident between a tenant. If you call in a complaint for a rodent infestation or a roach infestation and you are complaining about your landlord, and they then bring an inspector, do they need 48 hours written notice for that? And you have lodged a complaint.
If the tenant allows access to the unit, it's not a problem.
But that is, in this case, in question, specifically what happened. They had lodged a complaint. The landlord showed up with an inspector. But again, they had not given the 48-hour notice. So since the tenant had essentially asked for somebody to come, is that a situation where you still need to have the 48 hours notice?
Yeah, you typically would make the arrangements with the tenant. With the complaint or whatever. I mean, you wouldn't say, I'll be back in 48 hours. I mean, if you're the inspector's there to do the inspection, the tenant calls, then,
Then you make the arrangements with the tenant.
Right there.
Okay.
Councilmember Robinson.
I'm going to go back to the money thing a little bit. How many units do we have in the city? Rental units?
3,000.
You mentioned 3,200 inspections. Is that one per?
Not all of the units are inspected every year.
Okay.
There are about 350 buildings, and
I should have my budget book with me. It's about 3,600 to 3,800 individual units.
And it's roughly $100 for a licensing fee every year?
It's 94 per unit.
94.
94, and then...
So about 400,000 comes in, roughly speaking, to the city in license fees. I'm just doing a little quick math here.
I'm going off memory here, Councilmember Robinson, so I was looking at receipts for FY09. I think it's more in the neighborhood of about 300,000 for last year.
Yeah, because not everybody's on an annual license
Oh, okay.
process. Not everybody pays their license fee.
Okay. Well, let's say it's 300,000. So that's for the licensing, and you mentioned what that money's for. It's for Marjorie and an assistant and some overhead and other processing for those licenses. Did it used to be also for inspections? That's part one of my question.
For general property maintenance inspections?
Yes, for these kind of, when we did the inspections ourselves, did the licensing fee for rental units cover inspections?
It's my understanding the way that the fees have always been structured is that they've been limited to the cost of providing that particular service.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we paid for inspections from another bucket.
Correct.
Before we hired the county.
That's my understanding.
So we've just moved that bucket from the fees for our own inspectors to the county inspectors. Okay, so that's a clarification I wanted.
Councilmember Smith.
It was just about $300,000 last year.
Say again?
The actual is $317,000 in FY08, and the estimated in FY09 was $305,000.
Right, so roughly $300,000 to maintain the rental stock, not including inspections. The paperwork to keep our rentals going. What I'm hearing you say.
No, the general property maintenance code inspections, where you may recall we hired Walter Garcia, who's our code enforcement inspector, who goes out and does complaint inspections, targeted inspections, deals with folks that have concerns about how tall the grass is at a property.
Right.
Those inspections, the cost of providing those inspections are not covered at all by the licensing inspections.
That's what I'm saying too. My understanding is that the 300 and change that we get is for administrative upkeep of the rental units in the city, and that's it.
And the inspections. It covers the contract with the county and then any direct costs that the
The
city.
300,000 doesn't cover the contract with the county?
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay, that was the clarification I'm
It covers the contract with the county, it covers the costs
see.
incurred by the finance office, our office, and then just,
Okay, so in that case, the rental license fee of $94 a year covers inspections and administration of the license.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And in the past, it probably didn't.
That's what it sounds like.
Councilmember Snipper and then Councilmember Clay.
This is great, and I went through it pretty carefully. I think you've done a really nice job in updating it. Looks like a good contract to me, and I appreciate the idea of doing a 3-year renewable setup also just to save on the hassle of doing it, because as the agreement says, we could cancel at any time. The only complaints I've heard from landlords, and I haven't heard this in a while, so it may have attenuated a bit, is when the county inspector comes and writes up a list of issues, apparently quite frequently, when the reinspection comes around, it's a new inspector, and they often find additional things. I wondered if you'd comment on whether that's in fact true, that as a general policy that is what you do, or whether it's just I have some, well, I suppose all the wards have some landlords who are complainers, but if it's a real issue, I'd like to discuss it a little bit
I'll let Cynthia Lundy answer that question. She's pretty much on the street hearing the complaints from the landlords as inspections are being handled.
That's generally not the case. It depends on if you're speaking of the annual single-family rental properties or the multifamily annual inspections. Like certainly we go into the multifamily properties with a team, so you have inspectors that conduct their walkthrough on the initial inspection, write up a list of violations, and there's a notice sent out. On the re-inspection, maybe that particular inspector is assigned to a different floor because we're all going out as a team. But generally, we don't make it a habit to go in and find new additional items on the re-inspection. We're simply there to note whether the original violations have been abated. On the single-family inspections, it's always the inspector that originally went there that goes to do the re-inspection.
Yeah, that kind of confirms what I thought too, because it didn't make a lot of sense.
And typically, if we found a life safety issue out there on the re-inspection, no matter which inspector it was, it would automatically be taken care of, so.
Yeah. That's kind of odd. No specific address or anything like that, or particular landlord. It just strikes me as odd.
Yeah, it struck me
I think some of them like to have the same inspector every year.
Okay. And yeah, certainly
That's what I've
that
heard.
may change.
Yeah, no, this
not
was
the
specifically
re-inspection. Yeah. Only if there's some extenuating circumstance where that inspector that did the original inspection can't make the re-inspection, so then you get one of your teammates to go for you because you don't want to inconvenience the tenant or the landlord. So if you've assigned a specific date and time, you want to honor that. So maybe if you're out sick, you get one of your coworkers to handle it for you. That's the only instance.
I was going to say, the only place I'm familiar with that complaint is on commercial building inspections, which is not your department at all. Councilmember Clay.
Oh, I was just going to say to Dan that you might remember that we actually had this discussion about what the fees covered for the housing and community development during the budget session. And so there's, I think, like 2 hours of discussion on it. It went on endlessly. So it's there on the tape.
I'll go back and watch all the tape.
Yeah, it's there on the tape, and all the things that it did and didn't pay for, and the discussion of whether or not we could increase the landlord fee so that it did cover all of our costs, like Colta and all of that, and we ultimately opted not to. But it's all there on the tape.
And if I can just give staff the clarification that, because Councilmember Siemens basically said he agreed with me that we didn't want you investigating having HOC do the inspections as opposed to county housing. And Councilmember Siemens had another question.
Certainly heard enough evidence tonight that it's not worth the time.
Actually, Margie reminded me of another reason why it's good to stick with the county. If, for example, you're curious about a rental facility in your ward, you can go online and see the results of the last inspection. So a lot of those little niceties would be lost if we transferred over or split the responsibilities between two agencies.
Yeah, because that was one thing I noticed in your in the cover sheet, the option for the online complaint system. I thought was a real plus. Councilmember Siemens had another question.
Thank you. Yes, I had another question to follow up on Councilmember Robinson's questions, and not having time to look at the streaming video right now. How many rental housing licenses do we have, or properties have the licenses? Is it by property or is it by unit?
By unit.
The license numbers go with the building, but then
I guess what I really want to know
rental
is,
units.
how many rental units do we have in the city?
I believe my earlier remembrance was 36 to 3,800.
Okay, so 3,800 is how many are registered rental units, and the how does that compare to the total number of residences in the city? Because I remember in the 2000 census there were like 63% of the residents were renters.
Actually, I went through for, when we were doing the community legacy application, I went through and looked at the census data that Montgomery County's planning department does. And they go through and they do estimates to update it each year as far as income and numbers and stuff. And the percentage of households that are renter-occupied has dropped since 2000. We're also noticing, and I can get the exact figures for you, we're also noticing a number of rental properties that are going offline. They've been closed for foreclosure, they've been condemned,
Right.
sold.
I guess my point is, again, thinking about the economic difficulties that we face, that there's been a perception, at least among some people, that we have many unlicensed rental units within the city. And I know that State Comptroller Franchot, since taking office, has done a scrub of the tax records to, especially in regards to owner-occupied units. And it seems like the tax records would show both whether a particular property is owner-occupied or not, and also shows the residence, the address of the residence, and also gives a address of the owner, that by going through the tax records, it would be a pretty easy matter to identify many, many properties that are in the city that are rental properties, and you would be able to cross-check that to the rental licenses to see if you have potentially unlicensed rental units that should, for the rights of the tenants, be licensed properties and be receiving the inspections from the county.
The information that Councilmember Siemens is referencing is the SDAT, or the property database that the county, or the state maintains. And, we use it every day, many times a day, to verify the ownership of the property and also confirm whether or not it's primary residence or not. It works really well doing that on an individual case-by-case basis. It's also really slick if you're looking at condominiums or multi-family units or buildings where you can see all of the individual units and if it's a P or an R or whatever.
Right.
It's a little more problematic when you're looking at it on a citywide basis because it's difficult to sort in some senses. Because I've played around with it when we were going through and pulling together data for the rent stabilization information. We can go back and look at that, but that's one way that we do identify whether or not a property on the surface would appear to be licensed or...
I think it would be a way to better serve the tenants of the city for those who are living in unlicensed properties. And it might be something where the comptroller's office might have a suggestion on how you can get that information in a report from them.
I never thought of asking Mr. Franchot for that.
I thought Councilmember Siemens was volunteering to do the work.
It's actually very fascinating, but it's very time-consuming too.
Councilmember Clay.
You and I actually had a conversation about this about 2 years ago, because I had a tenant up the street, and when I was looking up who the owner was, I noted that the property showed that it was owner-occupied. And I talked to Peter Franchot, when I talked to you about using the database for the opposite thing that Terry was talking about, which was identify people who were getting homestead tax credits and not actually paying the full taxes in the city while they weren't living in their house.
Right.
And you said the same thing then, that the database is unfriendly to doing the crossover.
Yeah, and they've changed it now too, so you can't do a search by last name, which I used to be able to do, and now you can't do that, which creates new challenges for people that have multiple primary residences.
And that would create a challenge for the fair housing laws too, because they search the databases by last name to determine whether or not they are, if they have 4 or more units. So.
And Margie just reminded me too that one of the things that we're seeing more often now are people living in basements.
The illegal rentals.
The illegal rentals, which based on, these guys can tell you is dangerous for a variety of reasons.
But it also stresses the economic difficulties that some of the people are facing too.
Oh, yeah, that is. Yeah, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a clarification. Do you want us to do a 2-year or do you want us to do a 3-year agreement? Or doesn't it? 3.
It sounds like if either party can terminate with 90-day notice, that there's the ability to kind of change, if there's a change in policy, it's easy to implement. So if it's easier administratively, do 3 just to cut down on the work. I mean,
What was the fiscal impact of that?
The way it's set up is that the county notifies us on a regular or annual basis as far as the fees. So if, for example, we get the information in March that the fee is doubled, it's sufficient time to, and we're not prepared to deal with it in a budget standpoint, it's sufficient time to make arrangements to come up with another alternative by the time the fiscal year starts. And the contract is. Don't you? Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Now, our last item, which is discussion of the process for large grant requests. I'll try it again. Looks very good. Next.
Okay.
Would you like me to briefly go over this?
Sure.
Okay. Back in June, the council established the Small Community Grant Program, and as you may recall, the maximum grant amount under that program was $2,500. The council had also indicated a desire to have a process where you standardize requests coming from different community organizations so that everyone knew what the process was, what the rules were, and that there was some transparency to how the city was making those decisions. Jesse and I put together a proposed program for larger grants, and what we found ourselves saying is that over 2,500 didn't seem particularly large, but we didn't want to leave a gap in terms of funding requests. So we would have a small grant program for $2,500 or less, and then the proposed program would cover anything over $2,500. The application process is pretty much identical to what you all approved as part of the Small Community Grant Program. What would be different would be the decision-making process. The council allocated $20,000 in the FY 2010 budget, basically was able, due to the dollar amount, to set a defined amount in the budget process. For those grants that are larger, and I think in recent years the city has given some grants of, we mentioned Safe Tacoma earlier this evening, that was $75,000. Historic Tacoma got a $30,000 grant. It seemed much more problematic to me in particular to be trying to set an amount in the budget in the absence of knowing kind of the larger financial picture. So what we have proposed is that request would be coming in probably in mid-December, that in the month of January, the council would have the opportunity to review those applications, ask questions of the applicants, not make a final decision on who you would award funding to, given that we're still basically looking at revenues and things of that nature, but it would provide early on in the calendar year the opportunity for the council to at least give me some general direction in terms of which applications you would be inclined to fund, not knowing the whole financial picture, but at least give me some input on the front end as I'm working to prepare my recommended budget for submission to the council, most likely in early April. The one thing that Jesse and I also spent some time talking about is how do we handle organizations that have historically gotten funding every year, and one of those would be such as the Old Tacoma Business Association or the Independence Day Committee. Certainly the city, I think, has historically supported those organizations. I think it's possible to even construe the monies that we are giving as not being grants, but essentially they're providing a service under contract that the city would otherwise provide. As we tried to work through those issues, I guess I at least rapidly reached the conclusion that trying to define who fits into this bucket, who fits into this one, was becoming a little untenable and unwieldy. So what we have proposed this evening is that there would not be any automatic presumption that any organization would get funding from year to year, that they would basically need to submit an application every year. I think that would do two things. One is would give the council an opportunity to assess the organization's performance, what we have received in exchange for those funds. And I know one of the things that's been important to many of you is whether those organizations are also active in trying to obtain funding from other sources rather than simply relying on money from the city. But I also think it would give you the opportunity to weigh any continued financial support against other city priorities. Certainly, we're seeing revenues tighten up, and there may be a case that if you continue giving X amount of dollars to one organization, it may preclude funding another organization or may result in the need to reduce services in some other area. And I think that's something that should be an annual discussion by the council, and that you're making active policy decisions and providing direction to me. So that's essentially what's before you this evening.
Questions, comments? Councilmember Victoria.
Thank you. Barb, I think your last comments pointed out something that I saw as a weakness in here and a problem, and that is that I'd like to see more evaluation, particularly since you do fund, the council funds quite a few groups year after year, and I am concerned that there's not an assessment of how the money was spent in the prior year, both including whether they're looking for other funding or what the city of Tacoma Park got for what they put in last time. And was what they applied for followed through on? Did they accomplish their goals? Did they not? What did they accomplish with the money? And some specific accounting. During the hiatus in August, I actually ran across a disparity, and where it's possible funds were, nothing big, but I had heard that funds might be used in a way that was not what was directed, and I don't know that there's any follow-through on these sort of things. So particularly for these large grant items, I'm not questioning the intent or the, good causes that overwhelmingly this money goes to, but I think there is going to have to be a tighter evaluation on what was done, particularly since we do see many of the same groups year after year.
And I'd be interested maybe offline to talk a little bit about what you've heard. With many of I would say the majority of the grants that I can think of, some of those reporting requirements, I don't know that would hurt to make it somewhat redundant, but especially things where there's larger amounts of money, there are reporting requirements that are built into the memorandums of understanding. I cannot say that that was done uniformly. There have been some that have historically gotten funds, and I would say because of the way that rather than giving it as an actual grant where we have dispersed funds and required documentation either before or after that, sometimes the accounting has been done differently. So we can certainly look at that in that light, I guess, that if those mechanisms are not already built into a memorandum of understanding, that it's part of the application process as well.
Yeah, because my sense is that over time, the reporting requirements for anybody getting any city money have gotten a lot tighter. I think even just in terms of council member reimbursement for anything, I can say that the screws have been tightened a good bit. So if that's the standard, and I think it is, that's been going on, I think there's a lot tighter reporting than there ever was.
I think that's correct, Councilmember Williams, Mayor Williams. But I think certainly we may be able just to add something in here that, to flag whether or not funds were given in the prior year and asking, it wouldn't hurt if the documentation's already been given just for it to be submitted again. It should be easy enough to reproduce.
Well, I'd like to have it when we're looking at the grant application to go, oh, you did this, so that I know to look at it, for example, or that I can talk to them about it.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to build it all into one process rather than making you look in different avenues to try to get it all in one place. So we can certainly incorporate that.
I think a short narrative also of how they spend the money the previous year would be helpful to see how it all in one place.
Sure.
What they did, what they accomplished with it.
Councilmember Robinson?
I like the way you're headed. It brings to mind the requirements of the federal government on nonprofits. Every year they have to put their accounting online, and so it's possible to know how much money they raised, what they used the money for, how much money they got. it's a public process, and I think this should be public as well.
Councilmember Snipper.
I have a small number of edits I'll pass on to you, but I did have a more substantive question. On page 3, under requests will be evaluated on the following criteria. About two-thirds down, you have one, if the grant is for a new or ongoing program, is there a plan to become self-sustaining? What is the other category, new or ongoing? It implies that there's
defunct.
Trying to think,
What were you
Jesse.
thinking of?
If it were a discrete project, that was just something that, let's say, the Mosaic project, if it was meant to be just a one-time project, they're requesting a grant of money. It's not ongoing, it's not a program, it's not going to continue, it's new, it's just one time. That was the intention. That was what was different.
So maybe you should say that.
Way of looking at that.
Then why is there a plan to become self-sustaining?
Right, if it's a new program or an
If it's a
ongoing
one-time
program.
thing, I didn't see how that was, anyway.
I think
Think
it's a
about-
program as opposed to a finite project. We're all
So
about
the-
to interpret.
Yeah, it's sort of like if the question is, the question is if this is an ongoing program, do you plan to be self-sustaining as
Right.
opposed to?
That's what I
Right. Right, right.
Anyway, so you can see there's some, working on that sentence would be good.
Yeah.
And I have some edits as well that I'll pass, and they're on that same page. Any other questions? We're adjourned.
We even lost Jeremy.